Okay, thanks Jeff. So we looked at the battery powered backpack machine. Now let's look at the petrol powered technology, and can you give us a bit of an overview of the differences between the battery and the petrol, and also possibly some pros and cons of having this piece of equipment over the battery powered?
Okay, so quite a number of PCOs out there probably got one of these, and they're probably using it with an attachment like this. It doesn't matter whether it's a Makita or a Solo or Sylvan, whatever, they all work on the same sort of principle. A petrol driven motor forcing liquid out through an airstream and shattering it into smaller droplets. When we use this sort of technology through a standard orifice, we end up with fairly large droplets. So I think there's a little bit of confusion out there in the marketplace. Sometimes we think we're space spraying with that sort of technology, this sort of technology. But what we're really doing is misting. So we've got droplets somewhere around 50 to 200 microns coming out of this machine, which are really quite large. Their droplet life is not very long. But nevertheless very useful. We can do applications to foliage, we can do applications to surfaces, particularly outdoors, but I guess there would be some indoor applications as well. So the way that works is that we've got fluid coming out of the tank under pressure through an orifice nozzle. We've got different settings there for different flow rates, and that comes out and gets introduced into this airstream coming out of our blower motor and shatters that liquid into smaller droplets.
So when we purchase something like this, some of these backpack sprayers, misting devices, you generally receive this type of nozzle or orifice at the end. How do we convert this type of machine into a ULV type machine, piece of equipment?
Okay, so this isn't a ULV attachment, this is a misting attachment. And as I said, the droplets are much bigger than we would get out of some of the ULV machines we've already gone through. So we need to try and adapt it. There's nothing wrong with the way this machine is configured to set up for a ULV machine. We just need to change the technology and the way we're introducing and shattering those droplets to get them in a much smaller size than what they are coming out of this device.
So is there a lot of work involved in setting this backpack spray device up to be able to use as a ULV device to spray as a ULV mist?
No, not really. The configuration we've got here in this device, whichever brand it is ideal for doing it. We just need to put the right attachment on the end of the airstream to get those droplets into a smaller size than what we do out of this one.
Great.
So let's have a look. So you can actually see here, this normally configured with a standard misting attachment on the end, and we just remove that section, take it off, and we introduce a ULV head onto the backpack mister. So we're still trying to do the same thing. We're still supplying fluid down a fluid line through a much smaller nozzle. The nozzle's actually inside this joiner here in this case.
What is the difference between this standard attachment and the attachment that's been introduced to this piece of equipment here?
We introduce a ULV attachment like this one, where we have finely machined fluid nozzles that give us really precise output, probably about a third that of what we were seeing with those Dynafogs and the Pioneer. Introduced into the airstream, so there's not much difference in the technology. As I said, that's why this machine can do both jobs. But also, we have a spinning disc arrangement on the end of this nozzle. We'll have a look at. You can see there that not only have we got air coming out, but the air is actually spinning this disc in the front here, and this disc further shatters the fluid coming out of the nozzle, and therefore giving us much finer droplets. And indeed, the other thing it does is it tightens up the variability of the spectrum. So instead of having a lot of small droplets, a lot of big droplets and everything in between, we get a tight spectrum of small droplets.
Jeff, we've now set up this piece of equipment to be able to be used as ULV to produce the right droplet spectrum. How do we calibrate this piece of equipment now that it's been set up for ULV?
Well, certainly to find out what flow rate's coming out of this machine. It's probably the easiest one that we've looked at so far. All we need to do is remove the hose at this point, because back in the fluid line is our fluid nozzle. So once we get past that fluid nozzle, we've got the right flow rate that's coming out of the machine. The thing we need to keep in mind is that the machine has to be running. The fluid tank in this machine is pressurised by the fan motor, so the fan motor needs to be running at its operating speed to get the correct flow rate that we would normally have when we're using it coming up the front here. So run the machine full revs into a jug and we'll get the flow rate of them.
Work out the litres per minute.
Exactly.
Okay, Jeff, so we've had an overview of how to calibrate each piece of equipment here and looking at the ULV setup on these pieces of equipment. Let's talk about the pros and cons between the battery-powered device and the petrol-powered device. How heavy is this device here?
Just under 15 kilos, Daryl. 5 litre tank and about 9 kilos for the unit itself with the battery installed. That will do about 15 minutes of run time with the trigger pulled 100%.
Fantastic. So we do know that the petrol-powered device is a little bit heavier. We're looking at about 13 kilos by the time, or while it's empty. And essentially it holds 15 litres of water. So fully laden, you're looking at close to 30 kilos. But you mentioned before, the way that this machine here is set up for ULV will last about 15 minutes with this amount of water in. So there's about 5 litres of water or fluid in this application. How would I set up this piece of equipment and how much fluid would I need to put in to get the same result from this piece of equipment?
So yes, Daryl, the fluid flow through this machine set up as a ULV is about a third of this one. So for 15 minutes of operation with 5 litres, this one only needs about 1.5 litres to do the same amount of time. So the difference in weight between the two machines when they're both set up as a ULV is not actually all that much different. When we go back to a misting application where the volumes are much higher or the droplets are much bigger, therefore using a lot more fluid, we have to put a lot more in the tank, the weight of the machine goes up. So as a ULV machine, there's actually not a lot of difference between petrol and battery. So now we're really just talking about what are the advantages of battery versus petrol, I think.
So some of the advantages, I guess, with having a petrol-powered device is that you have steady output, steady flow. You don't have to worry about battery degradation. This particular piece of equipment has a lot more capacity. So if you're using it as a misting device externally, you've got more capacity, you're not filling it up as much. If you're using it as a ULV device, is what we're talking about today, for internal use, then obviously you don't need to fill it up as much. So internally, I guess petrol powered has its disadvantages.
Sure.
Externally, you may be getting more volume, more runtime. Internally, battery powered would have advantages simply because you're not running an engine inside. I guess is one key point. What else can you tell me about these two pieces of equipment?
Well, I think the main thing would be, I mean, I can see a difference already in terms of the way we fill the tanks. We've got a much bigger opening there to the tank to get our product in. We've got a smaller one here, so we're going to need to use a funnel. But for me, the biggest difference is the noise. They're probably going to be similar in terms of the actual decibel output, but they're very different sounding machines. And I guess if we think about where we might use them, if we go into, say, a domestic situation, a petrol-powered motor that sounds a bit like a leaf blower is going to be almost not recognised. But if we come in with a machine that looks a little bit different, sounds like quite something different, then it's going to raise some sort of suspicion and questions of what's going on. So sometimes the noise from a petrol motor might be a little bit more less recognised than that of this technology.
No, I agree.